This clip is brought to you by SaveWithConrad.com.
Let's talk about the match itself. The day of the show, it's April 29th, 2001, the Allstate Arena in Chicago. You know Chicago, it's a sellout, 15,592 fans. The gate is still super strong, $831,510, nearly another $144,000 in merchandise. It's billed as the 18th sellout in a row in Chicago. I think we've talked about this before, but in my opinion, Chicago is probably the premier town for wrestling in America. Would you agree with that?
Without a doubt. I think Chicago might have surpassed New York, and that's hard for me to say because New York is our home. That's where WWE started, and that's, where they got their name from. But Chicago was just, every time we went there, it was sold out. Fans were so enthusiastic. It was a no-brainer to book at least 4 or 5 shows a year there because we knew we'd sell out every time.
I also want to point out this show is perhaps the first sign that things are changing. The prior year, this show did 675,000 buys. This show here does 370,000. So you're down 300,000 buys year over year. And let's remember, this is 1 month after the largest non-boxing pay-per-view ever, WrestleMania 17. It did over 1 million. So while the gate is strong, it does feel like the interest has cooled off. In hindsight, do you think this is just the nature of the business? You sort of mentioned earlier that the business is cyclical, or how much of this could be contributed to Steve Austin turning heel and the fans not being ready for that?
Well, it might have contributed to it. I mean, Austin should have never turned heel. I thought he should have been baby because he was not stale as a baby face. He was still red hot. But, the company wanted to make some moves and they wanted to do something different. But, business wasn't so bad. I mean, we might have, the pay-per-view buys might have been, 60% of it was the year before. But we were still doing good numbers. They were very respectful numbers. 375,000 pay-per-view buys is still pretty good. The paydays are going to still be pretty strong. And we were selling out arenas still. So business was still good. It just wasn't as good as it was the year prior.
I'll tell you this, the reviews for this show are mixed as well. The readers in the Wrestling Observer gave the show only 33.6% thumbs up, 23.7% thumbs down, and the majority, 42.7%, thought it was a thumbs in the middle show. But the majority also thought you and Benoit had the best match that night. You guys got 104 votes. Second place, believe it or not, was Raven versus Rhino with 69 votes. So it's a strong crowd. It's a big sellout. It's America's favorite wrestling town, Chicago, and you guys steal the show. But the fans at home, they don't really love the show. What do you remember about that night besides your match? Was it a hot crowd?
The crowd, for Chris and I, it wasn't so hot, but there was a reason for that. We didn't have a scoreboard.
I see.
A clock and, the amount of submissions Chris and I got on each other. So it was really hard to follow our match without a timer and without the amount of submissions that we had on each other. And it just was real. We were working uphill the whole time to make it a success. And we had the right psychology with a submission only match. You want the babyface to go down a couple of submissions, so he's trailing. And that's how you get the fans emotionally involved in the match, is they're going to cheer the babyface on to make his comeback and try to surpass the heel. And so we did everything right. It was the right psychology, and we put the match together. We had an incredible match, I thought. It wasn't our best match, but it was pretty strong. And I just think that, people did enjoy it. They just weren't as vocal. And, when you look at the pay-per-view, that's not a good rating with the thumbs up and thumbs down, especially a thumbs in the middle, especially for a pay-per-view, because that's when we put on our best performances. And, Rhino and Raven, I think is what you said, was second.
Yep.
They got half of our votes. So we dominated the pay-per-view,
yeah.
Chris and I. And that shows that maybe it wasn't as good of a card as it should have been.
Let's talk about your match. You're on fourth that night, and the match begins with a scramble of sorts for submission moves. And it looks almost like a shoot amateur contest, but the goal is you're going to grapple into a submission. And Meltzer would be, he loves this type of stuff. He writes, of course, the mat work was very good. Even in Japan in worked shoots where there's a lot of mat work done and they don't do pinfalls or near falls, they always balance it out by allowing knockouts, which stiff blows were used to counter the mat work and set up working in the submission in the build. Even the best submission guys in Japan need the hard striking to set it up and make it work, and only the best go 30 minutes to an educated crowd. So he's trying to, I guess, lay the groundwork that perhaps in Japan, the rules would have been a little different, but the audience would have been more ready to receive it. Perhaps in this era where we have Jeff Hardy jumping off of ladders and Raven hitting people with trash cans in the head, maybe they're not as into this or as educated for this or as ready for this. Is that a fair criticism that maybe on that particular night, they didn't really understand all of the groundwork and they love the characters, they love the story, but the mat work was maybe over their head a little bit?
You mean the mat work Chris and I did?
Yes.
Well, we did a lot of amateur style wrestling at the beginning of the match.
Right.
And, it was really different. And, I would initiate a move and Chris would counter, and I would leave openings for him to get his crippler crossface in. So I was floating with Chris and leading him through an amateur wrestling match where you can't really plan it. You have to go just by instinct and reaction. And it was a great little trade-off. I thought it was really awesome. But as a fan, you don't really understand the scoring of amateur wrestling. And if you take a guy down and, the fans don't know that's 2 points, it's hard to explain to the fans that are pro wrestling fans. But, anytime a guy is underneath, they know the guy on top's at more of an advantage, but they don't understand the amateur wrestling aspect of it. But I thought the move set and everything we did was pretty cool.
Let's talk about an interesting spot here. Benoit does get the crossface on you, but you guys are on the outside and you're tapping out, but because you're on the outside, it doesn't count.
Doesn't count.
And so eventually Benoit's arguing with the referee about that. You get angry and grab a steel chair. Eventually you get the first tap out with a knee bar. And when Benoit taps, the crowd pops. And that's kind of interesting because you're the bad guy. But I think they just were excited to see something happen here. But I do want to mention, to your point, that's not the end of the match. We're going 30 minutes, sort of Iron Man style. So it's who can get more submissions. And Heyman would do his best to explain that. Meltzer would write, Heyman did a good job in explaining that taps would be quicker in this match. He didn't quite say because the match continues and you have to go 30. It's suicide to avoid tapping because you'll be a dead duck for the rest of the match with an injured joint. But he tried to explain the psychology of it. I'm with you. I think in hindsight, Kurt, if there was a scoreboard, and there was like a scoreboard that had not only the number of submissions, but the timer, you could really level that up. But I don't know that the audience and the commentary and the matchmakers were perhaps all on the same page, because that didn't happen, right?
No, it didn't. If you were watching at home, you had a scoreboard and you had the amount of submissions up on the TV.
Right.
And you had commentary explaining everything. So the match was a lot more exciting at home than it was in the arena. I don't think they explained it enough when they decided to do that match that night. And, I know they had Howard Finkel come out and explain the rules of the match, but the fans aren't really listening to Howard. Once he says, welcome to the WWE Raw, fans get all rowdy and they don't really listen after that. So it was a tough thing to do. It was really difficult to put that match together and make it make sense for the fans there, because they weren't able to see anything that would show proof of how much time was left or how many submissions we had on each other.
The next pinfall, I guess, or the next, we'll call it a pinfall, is an arm bar. Benoit gets this one. So you had the first one. Now Benoit's going to tie it up one apiece. We don't call it an armbar here though. That's what we would call it in 2021, because we're all familiar from watching UFC. That's what it is. But in pro wrestling, it's referred to in this era as a cross arm breaker. And Meltzer didn't think the crowd understood this because they've never seen anyone on WWE TV tap out to that before. This is a weird era because the UFC doesn't really become a household thing for another 4, 5, or 6 years, with Tito Ortiz and Chuck Liddell and the Ultimate Fighter. And that really leveled up, fans at home's knowledge of jiu-jitsu and submissions and all that. But here in 2001, were you concerned? Nobody taps out in wrestling to an arm bar, or were you game for that?
I was game for it because we couldn't continue to use our submissions.
Right.
If we use them too much, we prostitute them. And, you know, and at the same time, it doesn't make sense. If I put 50 ankle locks on Benoit and he only taps out twice,
yeah,
it makes my move look like shit.
Yes.
And same thing with Chris. So we needed various amounts of submissions that we could use outside of our own submissions to keep the match interesting, to keep it more exciting, and to not to just go back to your submission hold that we use regularly and prostitute it.
At about the 20-minute mark, Benoit's going to shove the referee down, and it seems like a DQ moment, but while the ref is down, you blast him with a chair, and then the ankle lock gives you fall number 3 at 1940. At 1855, almost immediately after the 30-second recovery period, you get another fall with the crippler crossface. So at this point, you're up 3-1. And Meltzer would say, noticeable cheers for Angle live at this point, since he beat Benoit with his own move. Who comes up with that idea? Now I'm going to use your finish on you.
Well, Benoit came up with it. He thought that we should trade off and use each other's finish holds. And it was a great idea. I think it's the first time Chris and I actually did it. And we can continue to do that later on in the future because it worked out so well and the fans responded to it. And it was a really cool spot to make Chris tap out to his own submission hold.
On the road to the next fall, you take a back body drop over the top rope and you do a full 360 over your head too. It looks pretty impressive and even gets a replay. Is it just me, or did you not take very many bumps over the top rope backwards in your career?
No, I'm a wuss. I'm afraid to go backward over top of the rope. I always have to turn before I head over, but yeah, I was always scared of doing it. I never really learned how.
It's amazing to me that a guy who will climb to the top of the tallest cage in the room and flip backwards is nervous about going over the top rope backwards.
Well, going over the top rope isn't high enough to go backward. I know I'm going to do the full flip on top of a cage.
Next up, Benoit tries a sharpshooter, and that causes JR to make reference to the Hart family, but you make the ropes. And this is still during the time where Brett was mortal enemies with the company. So that's a much bigger deal in this era than it is now. At 11:55, Benoit gets the tap with a half Boston Crab, which looks like a version of Jericho's Lion Tamer. And then at this point, Benoit's down 2-3, but your strategy at this point changes. You're no longer trying to score submissions. Now you're trying to retreat, because if time runs out and it's 3-2, you win. Meltzer would write, ahead 3-2, Angle started stalling. With no clock and scoreboard, the live fans didn't seem to get the story, and they were telling a logical stalling story and riding the clock. Ross, with his sports background, did a very good job of getting that across to the TV viewers, which is why this match played so much better on TV. Boy, in hindsight, this feels like a teachable moment for the company. In the future, when you did some sort of beat the clock thing like this, would you always ask, hey, are we doing a scoreboard this time? And just bring it to their attention in case someone in the production truck forgot?
Yes. I did some Kurt Angle challenges where I had 5-minute challenge, and we always had a clock. So we learned from our mistake and we moved on.
At 6 minutes and 10 seconds, Benoit tries to grab an ankle lock, but it's pretty messy and you escape to the ropes. At just about 2 minutes and 5 seconds, Benoit gets the tap out with the ugly ankle lock, and now it's all tied up 3-3. And you get the ankle lock on him as the match countdown ends, and Benoit's tapping, but it's after the bell. The referee declares that we have to go to overtime and the match must continue. You're crying, but you do have a legitimate gripe. You get a twister on Benoit on the ground, which is a legitimate move, but the fans here have never seen it. It's like a ground abdominal stretch. And after a scramble, Benoit gets you in the crossface and wins. What did you think when this is all over and the bell rings? Were you pleased with it? Were you frustrated with it? What did you think of this one?
I was pleased with it after I watched it back on TV. I wasn't pleased with it because we didn't really get the crowd into the match as well as it was put together and executed. We didn't get the response that we thought we were going to get from them. And it had a lot to do with just the clock not being there. And that was our issue. If we would have had that, I definitely would have been, I would have said that our match was the best match of the whole pay-per-view, and we would have probably had more votes for the best match. But, it just kind of sucked that we didn't have the clock.
Let's mention that the match got 3.25 stars from Meltzer, and he had this to say. While Angle versus Benoit got the majority of votes for best match, there was something missing. The match played much better on TV than it did live, and that was because of the commentary. The bottom line is that as great mat wrestlers as both men have proven to be, this was just too long, and it was too much of a handicap to eliminate near falls. This was a match that would have played much better during the 70s in the United States, but even then, they had 2 counts to play with, or in Japan, where the submission moves are more over. The crossface and the ankle lock spots got the crowd to react, but moves like knee locks and arm bars haven't been pro wrestling submission moves on WWF TV, and the crowd wasn't educated to them. Without the ability to use gimmicks, do near falls, and break tables, 30 minutes was too long for this live crowd. The most falls concept works against the match because fans still see the top guys don't tap out, and these guys did 3 or 4 times in one night. I don't think anyone would argue that neither man really got over, regardless of technical skill or who won or lost. So I think Meltzer makes some great points. He doesn't bring up your scoreboard thing, but I think you're onto something there in a big way. Do you think in hindsight, it did hurt the match not having a regular pinfall? The 1-2 kick out moments in the match. Does that take away the psychology or the build of the roller coaster ride you try to take fans on?
Oh, without a doubt. You take away pinfalls, you're taking away most of the match. The pinfalls are the exciting moments in the match.
Yeah.
And, having a submission match, it becomes slower. You have a guy in a submission. There's not a 1, 2, 3 count. So you're just holding off and trying not to submit. And the fans are, wondering if you're going to, but it's hard to get into when you don't have the into the match, when you don't have the near falls. That really helps the psychology of the match. That's what makes it more exciting. And to not have pinfalls, to just have submission, made it that much harder to have a match like that.
In hindsight, if you had this to do over again, would you have wanted a straight submission match, or do you think that this was one of those ideas that was perhaps better on paper?
I would have done it still. I love challenges. I believed in Chris and I that we would hit it off, and I didn't have any doubt in my mind. I just wish we would have had a clock. I really think that was the main issue.
Hey, it's Conrad Thompson. Thanks for checking out the podcast here on YouTube. Be sure to hit the subscribe button and the notifications bell so you get a notice anytime we upload some new content. And go save yourself some money right now. If you're in a 30-year loan or you have credit card debt, it's not a matter of if I can save you money. It's a matter of how much. Find out right now for free at SaveWithConrad.com.